I am Amelia Hart, 32 years old, project manager at a mid-sized interior design firm in downtown Chicago. My life wasn't extravagant, but it was stable. A 2-bedroom apartment with tall windows overlooking the river, a job I'd worked hard to earn, and a circle of friends who believed I had it all figured out. Most days started with the hum of the city, trains rushing below, the faint smell of roasted coffee from the cafe across the street, and the sound of his voice asking if I wanted my latte with almond milk or regular. His name was Daniel. He worked in finance, always in pressed shirts, always with a phone buzzing somewhere near his hand. We had been together for 4 years, living together for 3. Not married yet, but close. Or so I thought. We'd talk about buying a house in the suburbs, about a golden retriever we'd named Charlie, about trips we hadn't yet taken. It wasn't a fairy tale, but it was ours. Solid, predictable, safe. Our mornings were almost ritualistic. I'd leave for work around 8:30, laptop bag slung over my shoulder, coffee cup in hand. He'd kiss my forehead, always the forehead, and whisper, "Go make the world prettier, Miss Designer." I'd laugh because coming from him, everything sounded like a promise. On weekends, we played house like it was second nature. Farmers markets, DIY projects that never quite finished, lazy Sunday brunches with jazz humming from the speakers. Friends would say we were goals. My parents adored him. My mother once told me, "Amelia, he's the kind of man you don't meet twice in a lifetime." I believed her. I earned enough to live comfortably, not luxuriously, $85K a year, a stable 401k, a growing savings account for the someday house. Daniel earned more. He liked to remind me that didn't matter, that what we were building was built on trust, not balance sheets. I trusted that. God, I trusted everything. There was a softness to our home. The walls were warm beige, the curtains cream with faint gold threads, and the couch, the one we argued 3 weekends over before finally agreeing, faced the skyline like a framed promise. Nights ended with wine. Days started with shared glances over burnt toast. Little things, quiet things, the kind you never imagine can turn into ghosts. Sometimes, lying in bed, I'd trace the freckles on his arm, wondering how something so ordinary could feel like forever. We made plans. Italy in the spring, New York at Christmas, maybe a proposal next year. "There's no rush," he'd say. "Forever's not going anywhere." Looking back now, I wonder, was that where the first crack lived? In the way he said forever like it was furniture, something you could move around? Or did it start even earlier? In the late-night texts he said were just work? In the unexplained weekends he suddenly needed space for? But that was later. This was before the betrayal. When my world still smelled like fresh coffee and rain against the window. When my name, in his voice, still felt like home. I was a woman who believed in the quiet kind of love, the one you build in everyday moments, not grand gestures. I was the woman who trusted her partner without checking his phone, who planned a future without questioning its foundation. And that's the cruelest part, isn't it? Betrayal doesn't come with thunder. It comes with a whisper, softly enough that you don't hear it until it's already moved in. They say betrayal never arrives as a storm. It starts as a whisper, a faint crack in the walls you thought were unbreakable. For the longest time, I believed our marriage was unshakable. We had built a life together on late-night promises, shared laughter over takeout dinners, and quiet mornings with coffee that smelled like safety. It had been just over 2 years since we tied the knot. I worked as a project lead at a well-known architecture firm, my days spent buried in blueprints and client calls. He ran a mid-sized construction company that was steadily gaining respect in the industry. We were both busy, relentlessly. But we had one rule. No matter how chaotic the world got, we would never eat dinner apart. It was our anchor. A promise that said, no matter how high we climb together. But promises, like glass, don't shatter all at once. They fracture in silence. At first, it was little things. Meetings that started to run late. Unexplained site visits. Calls he would take in the other room. His voice low. His words vague. The phone that used to lie face up on the table now always lay face down, buzzing silently as if it had secrets of its own. I remember one Thursday night. I had cooked his favorite creamy garlic pasta, the one he once said reminded him of our honeymoon in Florence. The clock struck 9, then 10. I called him, no answer. At 10:47 he walked in, smelling faintly of a cologne I didn't recognize, his shirt slightly wrinkled like he had been somewhere he didn't plan to be. "Sorry, long meeting with the clients," he said, kissing my forehead without really looking me in the eyes. Something in me wanted to believe him, so I did. Because that's what love does in its first stage of doubt. It makes excuses for the silence, it forgives the late nights, and it turns a blind eye to the little lies. But the cracks widened. The dinners became rarer. Our conversations turned into checklists. Did you pay the bills? What time is your flight? Don't forget the groceries. The warmth that once filled our apartment now felt like a flickering candle struggling against the wind. One night, I found his jacket carelessly draped over the couch. In the pocket, a receipt from a high-end restaurant I'd never been to. 2 glasses of wine. A single dessert. My heart sank. Not because of the receipt, but because of the date. The same night I sat alone at home, waiting with cold pasta on the table. I told myself it was work. It had to be. Because what else could it be? But somewhere deep down, a quiet voice whispered, "You're losing him." Or maybe, "You've already lost him." And that's how betrayal begins. Not with the act itself, but with the slow erosion of certainty. The thing about truth is, it doesn't knock politely. It creeps in, uninvited, through the cracks you've been ignoring. A week after I found that restaurant receipt, I decided to stop pretending I didn't notice the changes. I was tired of convincing myself that late meetings were just business, and that unexplained messages were innocent. I wanted answers. Clear, undeniable answers. It started with his phone. One morning, while he was in the shower, it buzzed with a message. The screen lit up just long enough for me to catch a glimpse. Last night was unforgettable. When can we see each other again? No name. Just a number I didn't recognize. My chest tightened. My hands shook, hovering over the device. I didn't open it. I couldn't. Because opening it meant crossing a line, confirming a fear that would break me completely. Instead, I slipped the phone back and plastered on a smile as if nothing had happened. But once a seed of doubt takes root, it grows wild. The following days felt like living in 2 parallel worlds. One where I was his loving wife, and another where I was a silent detective, gathering fragments of a story I didn't want to believe. I noticed more: the sudden gym sessions, the new cologne, and the way he started locking his phone at night. One evening, I followed him. I know how that sounds. Desperate. Maybe even pathetic. But desperation has its own logic when your heart is on the line. His client dinner turned out to be at that same upscale restaurant. I parked across the street, heart racing, palms sweating against the steering wheel. And then I saw her, a woman elegantly dressed, laughing at something, he said as he leaned in just a little too close. The way his hand brushed hers across the table told me everything words never could. I didn't walk in. I didn't scream. I didn't even cry. I sat there, frozen, watching the man I married become a stranger in front of my eyes. When he came home that night, he smelled like betrayal masked with mint gum and expensive cologne. "Long night?" I asked. "Yeah, exhausting," he replied, loosening his tie without meeting my eyes. That was the moment I knew. The man standing in front of me was living a double life, and I was the ghost in one of them. I wanted to confront him right there. But something in me said, "Wait, don't accuse without proof. Don't cry without a plan." So I did what any woman does when her world starts to crumble. I gathered my pieces quietly, one by one. I checked our bank statements, lavish dinners, hotel bookings, unexplained transfers. Each transaction was like a cut, small but deep. Started recording his stories, mentally noting the contradictions. Tuesday's meeting became Thursday's dinner. Friday's site visit turned into a canceled flight. And with every lie I caught, the truth became heavier, sharper, and ready to pierce the facade we had built together. The final blow came on a rainy Friday evening. I came home early from work, the city still buzzing with the aftertaste of a storm. His car wasn't in the driveway. His laptop, however, was carelessly left open on the living room table. A message window blinked on the screen. "I can't wait for our weekend getaway. I've booked the villa. She thinks I'm on a business trip." That was me. I stared at the words, numb. There it was, the unraveling truth in plain black and white. I didn't scream. I didn't smash the laptop. I just sat there. Because when betrayal finally shows its face, the silence is louder than any explosion. There's a moment, right before a storm hits, when the air goes still. The world feels heavy, like it's holding its breath. That's exactly how my house felt the night I finally confronted him. He walked in around 10 p.m., rain clinging to his coat, phone still in his hand. He didn't notice me sitting in the dark, waiting. "Long day?" I asked, my voice steady in a way that surprised even me. He looked up, startled. "Yeah. Meetings ran late. Meetings. Always meetings." Stood, crossed the room slowly, and placed a printed copy of the villa booking on the table between us. His name, her name, the date. Tomorrow. For a second, the only sound was the ticking of the wall clock. "What is this?" he asked, his tone shifting from confusion to defensiveness. "Tell me," I replied. He picked up the paper, his jaw tightening. "It's not what you think." I almost laughed. That line, "It's not what you think," is the anthem of betrayal. "Then explain it," I said, my voice cracking for the first time. His silence said more than any confession ever could. "You've been lying to me for months," I continued, my hands trembling now. "The dinners, the late nights, the secrets. I saw you with her." He finally met my eyes, and in that moment, I saw it. Guilt, yes, but also a strange kind of relief. Like a man caught mid-act who no longer has to pretend. "It wasn't supposed to go this far," he whispered. That was it. Not an apology. Not even denial. Just an admission wrapped in cowardice. Something inside me broke. Not with a bang, but with a quiet, shattering snap. All those years of trust, of building a life together, reduced to ash in the span of a few sentences. "Why?" I asked. My voice wasn't angry. It wasn't even loud. It was the kind of quiet that comes when your heart has finally given up fighting. He shrugged, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know. I felt stuck. And she made me feel alive again. Alive. As if my love had been a cage. I remember laughing then, an empty, hollow sound. So, this was your escape plan? Sneaking around like a teenager? Booking villas while telling me you're working late?" He flinched. Not because of the words, but because the mask was gone now. There was no more pretending, no more perfect husband act. Just a man who chose selfishness over commitment. "I didn't want to hurt you," he said. That was the cruelest part. He said it as if the hurt wasn't already done, as if his choices hadn't carved scars into a future I once believed in. The argument that followed was a blur. Accusations, excuses, and half-hearted apologies. I don't remember the exact words. I remember the feeling. A room that used to feel like home now felt like a battlefield. At some point, I stopped yelling. Because yelling felt like begging for respect, and I was done begging. "I want you to leave," I said finally. He froze. "Just like?" "Like that," I repeated. "Take your lies, your cologne, and your villa reservations, and leave." For the first time, he looked afraid. Not of losing me, I realized, but of losing the comfort I provided. The home, the stability, the woman who believed in him. He tried to reach for me, but I stepped back. "Don't," I said. "You already made your choice." That night, he packed a small bag and left without looking back. And I collapsed. Not in front of him. Not in some grand, dramatic scene. But later, in the silence of an empty bedroom that still smelled like him, I fell apart. The sobs came in waves, the kind that shake your body and leave you gasping. I mourned the man I thought I married, the life I thought we had, and the future I had planned in my head. It wasn't just the betrayal that hurt. It was the realization that the person you loved was capable of choosing someone else over the promises you built together. And in that collapse, something else began to grow. Not revenge, not yet, but clarity. The kind that comes when the dust settles, and you finally see the ruins for what they are. Because betrayal doesn't just destroy, it rebuilds you. Piece by piece, the night was heavy with silence, the kind that suffocates you before words even find their way out. I sat on the edge of our bed, the same bed where we once whispered dreams and silly midnight confessions. Tonight, it felt like a courtroom, and he was late, again. The clock ticked past midnight when the sound of his keys finally scraped against the door. He entered, smelling of expensive cologne and something unfamiliar, a scent that didn't belong to our home. His tie was loose, his shirt crumpled, and his smile absent. Where were you? My voice was calm, almost too calm, the calm that comes before a storm. Work, he muttered, tossing his keys onto the table, avoiding my eyes. Work doesn't leave lipstick on collars, I said, my fingers tightening around the phone. In my hand. The phone filled with the messages, the receipts, and the pictures I never wanted to see. He froze. Just for a second. Then, like a man rehearsed in deception, he tried to smile. You're imagining things. You've been stressed lately. Don't you dare gaslight me, Aaron. My voice cracked, but it didn't break. I know, I've seen it. Every late-night text, every sudden meeting, every time you said, it's just business. You've turned our promises into lies. The air was thick with years of suppressed questions. He sat down, head in his hands. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, he whispered. Then how was it supposed to happen? My voice was trembling now, not from weakness, but from the weight of betrayal. Were you waiting for me to catch you? To give you an excuse to leave? Or were you going to keep lying until the guilt became too heavy for you to carry? Looked up, and for the first time in years, I saw fear in his eyes. Not the fear of losing me, the fear of being exposed. I still care about you, he said softly. Care? I laughed bitterly. You don't care for the person you cheat. You care for your image. You care for your comfort. You cared enough to lie, but not enough to stay faithful. Tears threatened to fall, but I held them back. This wasn't the moment for weakness. It was the moment of clarity. I gave up opportunities. For us, I continued. I turned down a promotion in New York because you said we needed to build a life here. I supported your dream when mine was just taking shape. And what did you do with that loyalty? You gambled it away for something cheap. He didn't speak. Maybe there was nothing left to say. Maybe silence was his confession. Do you love her? I asked finally. His silence stretched. And that silence was louder than any yes or no. I stood up. Then this is the end of our story, Daniel. Not because I wanted it to end, but because you killed it. The confrontation wasn't loud. There were no broken plates, no shouting matches echoing. Through the night, it was quiet, too quiet. Because sometimes betrayal doesn't come with thunder. It comes with the slow, cold collapse of everything you once believed in. And that night, as I packed a small bag, not out of defeat, but survival, I felt the first breath of something I hadn't felt in a long time: freedom. The morning after the confrontation was strangely quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't feel empty. It feels sharp, deliberate, like a blade waiting to be drawn. I sat at the kitchen table, a cup of baggy, black coffee untouched in my hands, and for the first time in months, maybe years, I wasn't crying. I was calculating. Daniel had left early, leaving behind the faint trail of guilt on his cologne and the illusion of normalcy on the breakfast counter. But things were no longer normal. The woman who begged, who pleaded, who swallowed her suspicions and silenced her instincts. She was gone. What remained was me, and I was awake now. I began where every war begins: information. I revisited every message, every unexplained absence, every business dinner, and every last-minute trip. I traced his patterns, his lies, and his weak points. I found names, dates, and locations, even the woman's Instagram profile, smiling under a filtered sunset with the same watch I had gifted him glinting on her wrist. My hands didn't shake this time. My heart didn't break. It hardened. But revenge. Revenge isn't about screaming in someone's face or destroying them in one wild blow. Real revenge is quiet, precise, surgical. You don't slash, you carve. I started with my job. The promotion I had turned down months ago, it was still waiting, though with a little less shine. I reached out to my manager and explained I was ready to relocate and ready to lead. I needed financial independence, not because I couldn't survive without him, but because I wanted him to see me thrive without him. Next came the finances at home. Our accounts were joint, our investments shared, all under the illusion of trust. I consulted a lawyer discreetly, arranged my share, and secured what was mine. No drama, no confrontation, just preparation. And then, the slow dismantling of his mask began. I didn't confront the other woman. Why would I? She wasn't my problem. My vows were with him, and he was the one who broke them. Instead, I let subtle truths slip at the right places. At his office gathering, I mentioned his busy evenings and his late meetings, harmless words coated in honey dropped in attentive ears, not accusations. The hardest part wasn't the strategy. It was the silence. There were nights when the ache of betrayal gnawed at my chest like a dull blade, nights when I wanted to scream at him, demand answers, and demand remorse. But I didn't. Because that's what he expected. A scene, a storm, a woman unraveling. I gave him stillness instead. And in that stillness, his world began to crack. One evening, he came home early, too early, and found me dressed elegantly, my laptop open and a ticket to New York on the screen. "What's this?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "A job opportunity," I replied, sipping my wine. "I'm considering it." "You're leaving?" His voice faltered. "Maybe. Depends on the offer. Depends on how much my future is worth." He stared at me, searching for the woman who used to orbit his world, waiting for his approval, his attention. But she wasn't there anymore. Revenge isn't always about destruction. Sometimes it's about presence, about becoming the storm they thought would never come. I didn't want to ruin him instantly. I wanted him to live every single day knowing the empire he built on my trust was collapsing, and that I was the one pulling the threads. Each polite smile at dinner, each calm response to his excuses, each night I slept without asking where he was. It all unsettled him more than anger ever could. Because guilt can survive fury, but it rots in silence. The reckoning had begun, not with fire but with a whisper, not with war cries, but with calculated moves. And as I closed the bedroom door that night, suitcase half-packed, passport ready, I felt something rare. Power. Not the kind you steal. The kind you reclaim. This wasn't about him anymore. This was about me. The woman who had been wronged, who had been underestimated, and who was now rewriting her story. And this time, I would write every chapter in ink he couldn't erase. The following weeks passed like a well-rehearsed play. Every step, every glance, every pause deliberate. I was no longer surviving his betrayal. I was orchestrating his reckoning. The quiet in our home had changed. It was no longer the silence of sorrow. It was the silence of strategy. Daniel started to notice it too. The late-night questions he used to deflect were gone. The desperate texts I once sent were replaced by polite nods and vague smiles. I no longer searched his phone or his eyes. I searched for openings. And they were everywhere. I began building the perfect setup with 3 simple tools: truth, timing, and exposure. First came truth. Small doses of it, delivered to the right people. His closest colleagues started hearing subtle remarks about his busy nights and unexpected errands. I never accused him outright. I only asked harmless, curious questions in their presence. "Do you think he's been working too hard lately? Have you noticed he's always on edge after those trips?" Curiosity is contagious. Rumors are seeds. I planted them gently and let them bloom. Next was timing. I planned my every move around his patterns, his meetings, his flights, and his comfort zones. When he expected me to stay home, I dressed up and went out with friends he didn't know. I still had. When he thought I would be begging for attention, I was building networks, attending professional mixers, and smiling with people who valued my presence, not my silence. I wasn't hiding anymore. I was positioning myself. The final tool was exposure. Daniel's world was built on image: the devoted husband, the charming executive, and the reliable partner. I didn't need to shatter that image in public. I only needed to let the cracks show. At a dinner party, I accidentally left my phone open on a chat with a lawyer about asset separation. At another, I mentioned the tempting job offer overseas, not as a threat, but as a casual life update. His friends exchanged looks. His boss's wife asked if everything was fine at home. He laughed it off, but his hands tightened around the eye. Glass every time. The beauty of the setup was that it didn't scream. It whispered, and those whispers began to echo in his life. Work meetings became tense. Clients asked subtle questions about his availability. His phone, once buzzing, with secret texts, now lay face down more often, locked and guarded. The woman he thought would always forgive had turned into the woman he couldn't predict. Meanwhile, I was changing too. There was a lightness in my walk, a steadiness in my gaze. The pain was still there, yes, but it had transformed from a wound into a weapon. My evenings were no longer spent waiting for his key in the door. They were spent drafting plans, signing documents, and opening doors of my own. I even started smiling again. A genuine smile, not the one he had trained me to wear when people were watching. Then came the moment I had been preparing for, the pivot point. He came home one evening, expecting the usual rhythm. Dinner waiting, me distracted, his alibi safe. Instead, he found me in a silk blouse, hair perfectly set, suitcase by the door. "Going somewhere?" he asked, his voice tight. "Just a weekend retreat," I said softly. "Work-related. You remember the one I mentioned weeks ago? I don't recall you mentioning it." "That's all right," I replied, slipping on my heels. "You've been busy." The word lingered in the air like smoke. Not accusatory, just factual. He tried to kiss me goodbye. I turned slightly and let it land on my cheek, not cold, not warm, neutral. That's the thing about silence. It makes people desperate to fill it. By the time I returned, 3 days later, his mask was cracking. He was attentive, suddenly interested in my work, and suddenly home earlier. But the damage was already rippling through his carefully managed life. I heard from a mutual friend that his mistress had started asking questions about me, that his boss had asked him to clear his schedule, that the whispers I planted had grown roots. This was never about embarrassing him publicly. That would have been easy. This was about control, regaining mine and dismantling his. The perfect setup wasn't a scene, it was a stage, and he was now performing for me without realizing the script was already written. The next chapter wouldn't be about hiding anymore. It would be about choice. Would I expose him? Leave him? Make him beg to stay? That decision was mine now, and only mine. The art of revenge isn't in loud confrontations or dramatic outbursts. It's in the quiet, calculated pressure that makes someone crumble from the inside out. By now, I had already set the stage. The divorce papers served, the evidence discreetly delivered to the other woman's husband, and the first tremors of his world cracking. But this was only the beginning. True control required patience, precision, and the ability to remain untouchable, while his life slowly unraveled. I no longer reacted with anger or desperation. Every word I spoke, every smile I offered, was measured. He was used to my old self, the trusting, quiet, accommodating partner, and that version of me was gone. In her place stood someone composed, indifferent, and far more dangerous than he realized. It began subtly. Conversations at home, casual mentions of work obligations, and offhand remarks about plans I had. I never directly accused him. I didn't need to. The knowledge of what he had done was already in his mind, festering. My calmness became the hammer, my indifference the chisel. At work and among mutual friends, I let small truths leak out. Not lies, but carefully framed statements that planted seeds of doubt. I noticed he's been unusually busy lately. Must be all the extra projects. Funny how he always seems tired after those long afternoons. The right words at the right time made people look twice. Curiosity grew into concern, and concern into suspicion. Without ever saying a direct accusation, I let his reputation wobble, and the cracks became visible. At home, I orchestrated a delicate balance. I smiled politely when he tried to apologize. I responded calmly when he tried to explain himself. I even shared trivial details about my days, meetings, professional milestones, small successes, just enough to remind him that my life didn't revolve around his infidelity anymore. Each interaction was a calculated move, designed to leave him off balance and second-guessing every choice he made. And it worked. I began noticing subtle changes in him almost immediately. The way he fidgeted with his phone when he thought I wasn't watching. The way his eyes darted toward me before answering questions. The tension that tightened his shoulders even when he tried to appear relaxed. His carefully constructed world. The one he thought I could never touch was now fragile. Every lie he had ever told hovered over him like smoke. He began overcompensating, showing up at home earlier than usual, buying small, thoughtless gifts and trying to reclaim an affection he no longer had. But no matter what he did, the imbalance had been created. I was no longer the woman who would wait silently, unaware. I was the woman orchestrating the dominoes, and he was the first in the line. Psychologically, he was unraveling. Nights were the hardest for him. He would pace, checking his phone, sending messages that went unanswered. Sometimes I would hear him muttering under his breath, asking questions he already knew the answers to. His guilt, shame, and fear were like invisible chains tightening around him, and there was nothing he could do to remove them. And I didn't need to touch him. I didn't need confrontation. All I needed was control, and I had it in spades. Each polite smile I offered, each neutral response to his excuses, each calm acknowledgement of his presence. They were all tools. The quiet became my weapon. His world began to bend without me ever raising my voice. Then came the subtle leverage, the documents, the legal filings, the insurance forms, and the quiet confirmations that I now had access to everything he had ever relied on. Every shared account, every joint asset, every document signed in trust, I had quietly secured, meticulously documented, and discreetly prepared. Nothing flashy, nothing confrontational, just undeniable control. By the time he realized what was happening, the trap was already set. Friends and colleagues had noticed his odd behavior, questioned his commitment, and speculated privately about his long afternoons. Clients and business partners had noticed minor inconsistencies and delays that had previously gone unnoticed. Every whisper, every glance, every subtle reaction was now a string I could pull at any time. I had become the calm eye in his storm, the silent, unmoving force that made him doubt everything. And as he stumbled, as he tried to regain composure and grasp what was happening, I was already steps ahead. Each decision he made to fix or cover up only tightened the net. Each lie he told himself became a chain he didn't even notice. By the end of the week, I had achieved something far more powerful than anger or destruction. I had restored my own power. I had rewritten the rules. He was no longer free, and I was no longer bound. Every look he gave me, every hesitant conversation, and every nervous glance at his phone reminded him that his choices were no longer private. They were mine to observe, mine to manipulate, and mine to expose at the perfect time. Revenge, I realized, wasn't about immediate satisfaction. It wasn't about screaming, breaking things, or issuing ultimatums. True revenge was strategic, slow, and deliberate. It was about letting someone live with the consequences of their actions every single day, while you remained untouchable, thriving, and free. And in that realization, I finally understood the full power of the game I had been playing. He was unraveling, piece by piece, and I was the quiet force orchestrating it all. Every string I pulled, every subtle move I made, was another step toward the ultimate collapse of the life he had believed he controlled. The storm was coming, and I was ready. By now, the web I had quietly woven around him was tightening. Every move he made, every conversation, and every decision carried the weight of the secrets he thought were buried. But secrets have a way of surfacing, and when they do, the impact is devastating. For him, it began subtly. Missed meetings, quiet office whispers, strange glances from colleagues, and escalated quickly into chaos that I orchestrated with precision. I had already secured my legal and financial safety, but the true pleasure of this chapter wasn't mine alone. It was seeing him lose control over a life he had taken for granted. It began at work. I had discreetly shared small details of his long afternoons and extra projects with a trusted mutual acquaintance. Nothing incriminating on paper, just enough to spark curiosity. Within days, colleagues began noticing inconsistencies in his schedule. Meetings that had been mandatory were missed. Deadlines that were previously hit on time were now delayed. Subtle murmurs began circulating in the office, first like faint echoes, then growing into undeniable concern. One Monday morning, he received a call from his boss. A call that seemed routine, but carried the weight of unspoken judgment. By lunch, the whispers had grown louder. Investors questioned minor discrepancies. Partners expressed disappointment over overlooked tasks. His composed facade cracked, and I observed it silently, enjoying the subtle satisfaction of seeing the man who had once held me in contempt now falter. Home life was no better. I had begun establishing patterns that disoriented him, leaving subtle evidence of my independent life, documents spread out on the table, a briefcase packed, and my phone strategically left on with emails visible. I smiled at him when he tried to ask questions, politely nodding as if his anxiety were irrelevant. It wasn't me being cold. It was me reclaiming control, reminding him that I was no longer the one living under the shadow of his lies. He reacted in predictable ways: frustration, defensiveness, attempts to charm me back, and even aggression masked as concern. Every reaction confirmed his growing unease, and I remained composed. never giving him the satisfaction of seeing my anger or hurt. I had learned the power of indifference. It corrodes faster than confrontation. Then came the domino effect. His mistress began asking questions she shouldn't have. Friends, sensing tension, started keeping their distance. Social invitations, once freely extended, now arrived with cautious undertones. Even casual acquaintances noticed his distraction. He couldn't understand why the world seemed to turn against him, why he was constantly on edge. He had been careful, meticulous, even, but the quiet orchestration of truth was unstoppable. At night, I would hear him pacing the hallways, muttering to himself and checking his phone repeatedly. The nervous energy that once belonged to me during the early stages of his betrayal had now consumed him. Every step, every glance, every attempt to regain control failed. I had become the silent storm, and he was caught in the center. The first major collapse came in the form of financial scrutiny. I had ensured that all joint accounts, shared assets, and sensitive documents were under my control or meticulously recorded. With legal guidance, I leaked subtle hints about discrepancies to the right people. Within a week, auditors and financial partners were asking questions, forcing him into awkward explanations and half-truths. He had relied on my silence to shield him, but that shield no longer existed. Simultaneously, his social standing began to falter. Invitations that once symbolized his status were rescinded. Business partners who valued reputation distanced themselves. People who had trusted him began questioning his reliability. The carefully curated image of perfection he had maintained for years was crumbling, not through scandal, but through methodical exposure of tiny inconsistencies, all of which he had created himself. One evening, he stormed into the house, red-faced and desperate. "Why are people looking at me like that?" he demanded, voice trembling with rage and fear. I didn't answer immediately. I merely sipped my tea, maintaining an air of calm that infuriated him further. "People notice things," I said softly. "Sometimes it's not what you do in public, but what you hide in private." He slammed his hand on the counter, panic overtaking composure. "This isn't happening. It can't be happening." "It is," I replied, calm and measured. "And it's entirely on you." The realization hit him like ice. Everything he had relied on, my compliance, his careful manipulation, the secrecy of his actions, was gone. His life, once so controlled, was now unraveling before his eyes. Then came the personal consequences. The other woman's husband, armed with the evidence I had provided, confronted the betrayal. Their separation was immediate, ruthless, and public. The emotional fallout ricocheted through every connection they shared: friends, family, and business contacts. And because Bob had relied on appearances and control, every collapse in his personal life translated into public and professional disaster. His parents-in-law, who had once trusted him with their business, pulled back support. His position as VP became tenuous, his decisions questioned. The house he thought secure, bought on trust and his wife's influence, now became another source of instability. I had orchestrated none of these events directly, but the timing and precision of my previous moves meant that the consequences unfolded like clockwork. By the third month, he was a ghost in his own life. Clients called him with doubts, friends whispered behind his back, and family questioned his reliability. Every day was a struggle to maintain the facade, every step forward weighed down by the inevitability of collapse. Meanwhile, I thrived. Professionally, socially, and personally, my life was no longer tethered to his chaos. I pursued opportunities I had once deferred, built networks, and established independence. I smiled genuinely again, not as a mask, but as a testament to the strength I had regained. The calm I displayed contrasted sharply with the storm that now engulfed him, emphasizing the consequences of his betrayal. Revenge, in its purest form, is not about anger or destruction. It is about restoration and observation. It is about letting someone experience the full weight of their choices while you rise above the chaos they created. Every glance he gave me, every hesitant word, every attempt to reclaim lost ground, it was all part of the fall I had orchestrated, silent but undeniable. The final part of this phase was the ultimate lesson. Life always balances itself. By removing my dependence on him, reclaiming my independence, and subtly exposing truths, I allowed karma to act without interference. His downfall was complete, yet I remained above the fray, untouchable and free. He had believed he was untouchable. He had believed that deception could be hidden indefinitely. But the truth, once set in motion, has a way of surfacing. And when it does, it doesn't just embarrass, it consumes. By the end of this chapter, I had accomplished everything I had set out to achieve. Not through rage, not through confrontation, but through quiet, precise, unrelenting control. His life was unrecognizable, his social and professional worlds fractured, and his personal bonds shattered. And I stood at the center, calm, composed, victorious. The stage was now set for the final act, the climactic payoff, where all consequences converged and the story of betrayal and revenge reached its ultimate, satisfying conclusion. The moment had arrived. Years of quiet observation, careful planning, and relentless patience were about to culminate in a moment that would leave no room for doubt, no room for excuses. I didn't need to yell, to throw objects, or to create a scene. I had learned early that true power comes from precision, not chaos. And now, the full weight of truth, timing, and consequence would crash down, unrelentingly, on the man who had once thought he could betray me without consequence. It began on an ordinary Tuesday morning, the kind of day that, in his mind, promised the usual routines: coffee, emails, a brief exchange of pleasantries with me, then off to the world he still thought was under his control. But nothing was ordinary anymore. The first domino fell when the courier arrived with the divorce papers. I had orchestrated it so it would be delivered to his office. Signature required, no ambiguity, no chance to delay. He opened the envelope, and the crisp, legal language stared back at him like a mirror, reflecting the consequences of every lie, every betrayal, and every moment he had thought invisible. Simultaneously, across town, the other wife received her copy of the dossier. A detailed, meticulously documented record of every secret lunch, every motel rendezvous, and every cruel word she had never deserved to hear. I didn't need to say anything. The evidence spoke louder than my voice ever could. By noon, the first shockwaves hit. The man who had once laughed at his ability to deceive now felt his carefully constructed life crumble. He called frantically, pacing the office, but I didn't answer. Not a single call, not a single text. I allowed him to feel the weight of his own choices, unmitigated by my presence. His colleagues, once allies, began whispering in corners. Minor mistakes, previously overlooked, were now magnified. Every project seemed to falter under the stress of a man unraveling from within. And home, once a sanctuary for him, became a place where silence was louder than any accusation. By evening, the repercussions were undeniable. The other wife, armed with proof and unflinching resolve, acted immediately. She withdrew funds from their joint account, moved her children to her parents' home, and filed for divorce. The house, purchased with her father's assistance, became another source of instability for him. Publicly, he tried to maintain composure. Privately, he faltered. Legal documents were signed in haste, meetings were canceled, and every step he took to regain control only deepened the fissures in his life. His reputation, once polished and impenetrable, now bore cracks that were impossible to conceal. I watched it all unfold with a measured calm. This was not gloating. This was the natural, inevitable consequence of betrayal meeting meticulous, patient planning. He had believed himself untouchable. He had assumed his actions were hidden in the shadows. But the shadows had been illuminated, and he was left exposed in every direction. His own family intervened. Confrontations became physical. There were fights over custody, arguments in the street, and even restraining orders. Friends who had once envied his charm now witnessed his desperation. Law enforcement became involved in minor harassment disputes. The man who had once walked through life with confidence now moved like a ghost, haunted by his own choices. And I remained untouched. I didn't need to confront him face to face. I didn't need to yell or cry. Every consequence was enacted. Not through my hands, but through the systems I had carefully activated and the truth I had delivered to the right people. Every step he took to regain control only confirmed the inevitability of his downfall. There is a unique power in watching someone who underestimated you finally grasp the extent of their mistake. It's not revenge in the traditional sense. No smashed dishes, no screaming matches. It's something far deeper. The satisfaction of knowing that justice has been restored, that balance has returned, and that deceit has met consequence in its purest form. By the end of the week, his world had shifted entirely. Professional standing collapsed. Personal life, shattered, social connections, fractured beyond repair, and all of it was silent, precise, and inevitable. Every domino had fallen, and every consequence was inescapable. In the quiet that followed, I felt a release I hadn't anticipated. It wasn't triumph over another person. It was a triumph over the helplessness I had felt when betrayal first entered my life. It was proof that strategy, patience, and unwavering composure could restore what seemed lost forever. The final act of this story wasn't a spectacle. It was subtle, almost poetic. He wasn't humiliated by a dramatic confrontation. He was undone by the truth, by the choices he had made, and by the people he had underestimated. And in that, the satisfaction was complete. I didn't need to break him physically. Life had done that. I didn't need to yell or plead. Life had spoken louder than I ever could. And as I looked at the path we had both traveled, I realized that the most potent form of revenge is often invisible, inevitable, and undeniable. In the aftermath, my life flourished. Professionally, I thrived. Socially, I reclaimed spaces that had been shadowed by betrayal. Personally, I found peace in knowing that my integrity, patience, and strategic calm had prevailed. I had taken the high road, but in doing so, I had left no stone unturned, and the consequences had been perfectly measured. The other woman's husband, his life would never return to what it once was. He had learned the hard way that betrayal, no matter how carefully hidden, carries consequences that cannot be escaped. And me? I had learned something more profound than revenge. I had learned the power of patience, the strength and composure, and the unstoppable force of truth. Betrayal is devastating. It strips trust, shatters assumptions, and leaves wounds that can linger for years. But when confronted with strategy, patience, and intelligence, the scales of justice can tip back. True power doesn't come from anger. It comes from control, foresight, and knowing when to act. He thought he had the upper hand. He thought deception could hide him from the consequences of his choices. But truth, once unleashed in the right hands, is unstoppable. And in the quiet, inevitable collapse of his carefully curated world, justice had been served. Looking back, I don't regret what happened. I regret trusting someone who never deserved it. I regret the pain caused by betrayal. And I regret the years wasted hoping for honesty where none existed. But revenge? Revenge is simply justice in its quietest, purest form. It doesn't scream. It doesn't announce itself. It waits, it builds, and it lands exactly where it should. And in this case, karma didn't knock. It tore the door off its hinges. If this story made your heart race or left you breathless, hit that like button. Share your thoughts in the comments. What's the most satisfying revenge you've ever witnessed? And don't forget to subscribe, because we have plenty. More stories where karma doesn't just arrive, it strikes with precision.